Data-driven communication and supply chain intelligence. That is the topic we're going to discuss today with Bill Dobie from Sedna. Welcome, Bill.
Hi, Leon. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you over here. I've been taking a dive into your background. You do have really a maritime background, I have to say. I knew you did have a different company before that, and I've also found A3 in between, and then moving towards Sedna.
Yeah.
Maybe it is good if you share something about your background and
sure.
what you're doing, how your journey went, basically.
My pleasure. No, I actually got a job in the shipping industry out of an ad in the newspaper just out of school in the mid-90s, and spent about 6 years working in agency, ship brokerage, and then dry chartering, mostly on the handy side. And then I'd always had a kind of background and interest in computers. And in 2000, I thought, as the markets were beginning to preliminarily digitize, I thought maybe some of the emerging marketplaces or approaches will need data services, will need underlying data to optimize and price. And so I got into developing a platform for ship agents and for the oil majors, mostly around managing agents, and that morphed into cargo inspections. I sold that business, or moved out of that business, in 2007, 2010, and then spent a few years mostly consulting, a bit of hacker for hire. I like maritime, I like software, built shipbuilding applications used by people like C-SPAN, vetting systems used by Viterra here in the Netherlands, and stumbled into the email problem, and not really intentfully thinking, oh, let's build a new email client, because actually that's a bit of madness. It was more, how do we help customers adopt new technology? And time and again, we kind of saw email getting in the way of that, the sheer volume of it, the variety, the velocity. And so I began to think, really on behalf of customers who were pushing me, how could we make their day-to-day interactions with email a little more efficient, and then create the time for them to adopt more expert systems like yourselves. So Sedna has been around since 2017. And we have about 180 customers around the world across the commodity, dry, wet bulk, energy, and ship agency markets.
Quite a nice footprint already.
Shipping, I'm always, as like we've talked about before, I'm always amazed at just how large maritime is and shipping is. But we've had some great early customers who believed in our vision and helped us push through with it. And I'm learning a lot also what it means to build a company at scale in maritime, which has its own challenges and opportunities, but it's exciting. And
if I look at the profile, there are a couple of words that this collaboration, communication is about collaboration, right? That is what maritime drives. Things need to be coordinated. I think that's one of my passions as well.
Yes.
Innovation, doing it differently.
Yes.
I really can relate to that, and then using technology for that. So
very much.
I think we're really on the line.
I like the first time we met, you were talking about collaboration right at the start. And I always like to remind people that even us, we're not actually about email. We're about the fact that you have to collaborate to do anything in maritime. The things are going wrong all the time. Opportunities are passing up all the time. So you have to find a way to talk more effectively, more efficiently. We happen to use email for that, but the tool is secondary to holding the conversation front and center.
I agree. Maybe that's one of the questions I like to ask in the Vodcast, is like, what is it that people do not get about this industry? Because it's such a wide industry, and yet it's complex. But is there one thing that stands out for you that people need to know if they want to understand the maritime industry better?
That's a good question. I mean, I always think there's a lot of things that work in the world that we don't give any thought to. So that, all this here, the cork, the cup, the water, this is all driven by this kind of magic supply chain, which kind of feeds and fuels us in for the most part, in a way that we never think about. And so the thing that I often want people to understand about our industry is how big it is, how important it is, how hidden the people who make it work, for the most part, really safely and effectively are, and that it's very much much more thought and attention should go into how we can help those people work more effectively, work safer, work with less carbon, work with more effectiveness. And so, yeah, just the sheer size of it. And I would like them to think about the people behind it. That's
the hidden aspect of
it. The hidden aspect of it. And we don't think about, right, it's not only, folks here in the Netherlands down at the docks and people like yourself doing optimization, the terminals, but the seafarers and the people who are toiling really so that I can just pick this up here. Yeah, without thinking about it. Yeah.
90% of all goods is transported over water, right?
Yeah.
It's so hard to get your head around.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And
very much. I think we were talking, or we mentioned before, like when new employees join, they often know nothing about maritime. And then once they start learning about it, they see ships everywhere. They see containers everywhere. They see it. It's a bit like suddenly you ride a motorcycle and there's motorcycles everywhere. So its vastness, its importance. And I think that's why it deserves more thought than a lot of people give it. More attention to how we can do it better. Yeah.
And for me, that's also like the industry is really ginormous, so to say.
Yeah.
But yet, if you look at it, it's also not that big, right? It's finite. If we talk about 80,000 vessels or something like that,
it's true.
Then again, this is where I, on one hand, find this industry like, whoa, this is so large, and then secondly, when I look at it, it's like, well, I'm do have a computer science background. 80,000.
Yeah,
but that's true. That's not a big number, right? But it is not about that. It's about the number of boxes or the number of movements that are being made in that. And then it really becomes quickly very, very, and a lot of people touch it, all the products that need to go over.
Yeah, this is, I think, a really good point, because sometimes people think they're computational problems. Like the reason the industry is not more efficient is, but you're right, like compare it to like running ads or the billions of data points that other systems produce. I have theories as to why, but I think maritime should be much more digital because you can model it in its entirety because of the physical reality of the number of vessels, the ports, the people and players. Our hypothesis, and we've talked about this, is the reason that's impaired is because digitization ignores conversation. But if you can actually merge those two things, if you can bring your digital view with our conversation and context view, I think you can actually see much more rapid. It should be more efficient. It should be more digital. Like, computer can get its head around it.
Yeah, and I like that part because it's also. If you have a conversation, if you are talking about something, it needs to be data that is driving that conversation. Right. Otherwise, and that is where I find the maritime industry so fascinating. It's all about operational excellence. Even though we're talking a lot about inefficiencies, I think the entire system is working the way it is working because of operational excellence and how it is being done. And then the vast number of stakeholders that are involved, requiring to align. And that is where the email comes in, or the communication challenge comes in. I think that's a nice step towards an introduction I recently read online from Lee.
Oh, yes.
And I would like to read it out loud because I did not memorize it, but I really find this a very powerful statement. And what he stated was like, the ability to manage communication efficiently is paramount. The complexity of global operations, combined with the sheer volume of communications across multiple teams and time zones, means that traditional methods of email and management simply don't cut it anymore. And for me, this is a very, very clear description of the problem. And what kind of challenges is on the table that needs to be addressed. Can you take us take us on that journey? How you came up with that problem statement?
I actually think that there are things, when you're working on a digital problem, there are things that you wish weren't true. And one of the things that you wish wasn't true was that a bunch of email came in 24 hours a day and you had to put it in folders, or maybe you didn't have to read it. And the reality is, if you don't embrace the fact that this volume has to be dealt with, you can't actually transition to a more effective way of working. So I think when Lee talks about acknowledging that the existing tool set doesn't rise to the challenge, it's really acknowledging reality, right? And I think one thing that the 25 years or so I've been working in this industry, probably in many ways on the same problem, has taught me is that a lot of the habits that people have in the way that they work, putting stuff in folders, double checking, truth seeking, validating again and again, this is to really avoid a problem, because a problem in maritime can threaten life, it can threaten environment, it can threaten finance in very serious ways. So people have built up this scar tissue of behavior of checking again and again, confirming the email, doing these types of things. And as you peel those layers off and make it more automated, more data-driven, you have to do it in a way that doesn't say to the user, oh, you're backwards or old-fashioned. You actually have to respect the fact that the user has been very good at mitigating risk for a very long time. And so I think our approach, the approach that Lee's talking about, is kind of embracing the volume, making more sense of it, trying to squeeze more data and structure out of it, and then finding a way to really connect to systems like yours, right? Ultimately, and this is counterintuitive, we want less email. We want more of the transaction handled in a platform like yours, but we have to find a way to lift the work from what is high volume, high variety, high velocity, over to a more expert system with a lot of respect. And I think that's kind of the whole Sedna approach is there, hey, let's accept that this is how it is, and let's try to renovate it from the inside instead of tear it down. And you've probably seen a lot of digital initiatives which have said, I see them still, we're going to get rid of email and spend $500 million on blockchain or something. And it's like, okay, but that's not actually going to make the industry more efficient today, which means I don't have the time to get better for tomorrow. Yeah.
And I think,
I really can rant about it a bit. So.
No, but acknowledging what the credits were of what is there. I think those things have been designed for a reason. And yes, complexity is kicking in big time. There are new challenges put on the table.
Absolutely.
I think the one I really see as a driver of change at this point in time is the sustainability.
Yes.
That kind of forces people they need to rethink basically, because there is a new challenge on the table, there is a new risk on the table, and that gives, from our perspective, what we see, that gives us the ability to start a conversation and take other things into account as well.
Yes.
In that sense.
This is why I like actually the Teqplay approach a lot, because we can wish that there were different infrastructures in place. We can wish that there were different fuel supply chains in place, powering, shipping and these types of things. But all of these things are years off, right? And we have to accept that reality. So the only real way that you can move the needle today in being more carbon efficient, more carbon effective, is to actually optimize existing assets. And to do that, you have to have the facts, consensus on the facts. So everybody involved has to agree this is what's happening. And then you have to have a platform to allow people to make a decision, a collective decision where they all benefit, right? And I think as you know, the maritime suffers from the prisoner's dilemma, right? There's always, my opportunity is maybe a little bit more than your opportunity. And so how do you create a more, well, if we both give up a little, everyone's going to gain a lot more. And so I think ideally what we can do is drive more data to your platform so that people can optimize existing assets today. And it's hard, right? Let's say, but I'm sure you've done the ROIs. Like, people think, I want to save an hour. Well, actually save 5 minutes. Save 5 minutes 5,000 times, right? And begin building on that, and then push it to 6 minutes and push it to 10 minutes, and you begin to change things.
And that is what I really like. And you have taken the conversation, the email, where I think most of the time is spent in talking and having conversations. So there are a huge number of conversations going on in maritime context. So if you can save 1 minute or 2 minutes per, that's really an enormous amount of.
It is now like, because how long we've been at it, maybe 7 years, probably a little bit longer if you count earlier versions of it. And for a long time, I thought to myself, we sell even today just on time saved. People think, well, that's not enough. The human hour is not enough to justify the investment. Well, it actually is, because maritime people are so effective at their jobs that if you free them up by half an hour or an hour by them not having to file stuff or create a bunch of scar tissue habits because they can't find stuff in an archive system in 6 months, they actually end up with way more time just to do their day-to-day job well, which is get the ship in and out safely, employ it profitably, those types of things. I'm actually quite optimistic about us reaching a point of more genuine optimization now, because systems like yours will be able to get data that's credible via AI from email flows and other tools, and more people are waking up to the consensus nature of a platform.
Yeah, that is the other thing that I really started with when I started Teqplay. It's about the context.
Yeah.
You make decisions not based on data, but within a context. So it's not only about the decision, but there is a whole bunch of things related to that that actually allow you to make better decisions or actually improve. Yeah. And I'm really curious. One of the angles we are taking, we started off with building tools that we're providing insights that could lead to a smarter decision in operations. Yep. So our operation focus was the key point. We have moved now more towards the area of continuous improvement. Mm-hmm. So we need to continuously monitor those processes to find where there is continually inefficiency or waste. Yep. And once we expose that, we can actually get the people to think about it and solve it in a smart way. And it kind of, if I hear you talking about Setna and the journey that you have taken, it also feels like you have taken kind of the continuous improvement approach. Was that a conscious decision, or how do you see that change happening in the organization?
I mean, it's a weird thing to benefit from the sort of fatal flaw of the dominant provider. But the reality was, Outlook, if you consider it the dominant provider, it was just slow. There are some technical reasons. You can go back to 30-year-old software and all these types of things. But that slowness was like a lever point, right? So, because normally you wouldn't buy email from a startup like us or a growth company now. But what happened is that the customers were facing such acute pain, like our early customers, Glencore and Casper, Transmarine, that they had to have a solution. And so we were fast. Okay, then let's go with that. From there, we then thought to ourselves, okay, well, beyond speed, how do we optimize? Okay, well, first, we can connect to a system like yours, to a voyage management system. We can understand what this email is about. And that's layering on another continuous improvement aspect of it. And then in the third stage, we said, okay, well, who's handling this transaction right now, this voyage, this trade? We pushed it to that user automatically. And it was just really, but layering on top of that kind of additional benefit over additional benefit. But to your earlier point, none of that was possible unless we wedged ourselves in the door by just being faster than Outlook. And it does still today astonish me how painful some people's working environments are using kind of day-to-day, historical tools, right? Companies with a lot of resources and capacity to buy, quote unquote, the best are forcing highly skilled people to work in a very, very backwards way, right? And they do it under the guise of compliance or security, but they don't actually think about the risks that their people being so inefficient poses to their entire supply chain. And so, but there's no big bang in this industry, right? I mean, you know that, running a business like yours.
Yeah, and I think,
and people want a big bang, with respect to the customers who are watching this, like they want a magic solution to all of this, and there isn't one. It's like the rest of maritime. No, it's hard work.
Yeah. But I think change is always hard work.
Yeah,
I think letting go of the habits that you have developed, which were effective and efficient a while ago. That requires change.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, really.
In your continuous improvement journey with your platform, have you ever run into something that really surprised you, where the customer didn't expect that this was the thing that was eating up all their time?
We do have quite some nice examples where actually we were showing data. What we're doing is basically measuring what is physically happening in a port. And one of our customers, we're looking at the sailing in process, which means like vessel is leaving anchorage and sailing in. Yeah. And we presented the numbers, and the number was around 3 hours, 3.1 hour, that it was taking the sailing in time, which that's the time it takes to get your vessel significant. Yeah. But they said, it's not true. It's 5 hours.
Yeah.
And we said, 5 hours? No. Look at the sample. These are hundreds of vessels, average 3.1. We've got some outliers, but it's very consistent. And then we started diving into it. And then it turned out that there were rules had come into place where they actually said, like, we need to order the ship 5 hours in advance because we do have gangs that need to be over there, and the gang is not allowed to start if the vessel is not there.
Right.
So they build in a lot of safety margins.
Right.
But if you look at that and then start doing the math, looking at these were big container vessels. So that really 1 hour or 1.5 hours that you actually can save. That's significant.
Yeah.
But you're also freeing up the limited resource of the key.
Yes.
So it's a double-edged sword in that sense. So and that is really where I like this data-driven approach that you show the numbers. You say this is factual, and that customers challenge you and say this is not true, but that's not the point. It's the fact that the data is proving you. Yeah. Where can I change something that will add value in the core process?
And I can really imagine how that habit formed, right? Probably at some point somebody didn't order within 5 hours, ship got to the terminal and there was no gang ready, right? So there was a specific penalty associated with that, which they could focus in on. Yep. But on a macro basis, they said, well, let's order everything 2 hours earlier. All that extra cost, all that extra time. And I guess what happens in our business too, and this is the same thing we try to do with Setna, like we try to embrace the volume, but slow it down enough so that people can see what's actually happening again and again. Slow it down enough for them to actually have that conversation with you. Because I bet like they just are too busy. Another ship coming in, got to order, the time's clicking away. I like that. Very cool.
But I guess also Setna is removing already a lot of noise, right?
Yeah.
Emails coming in 5 times.
Well, I mean, to give you a good example, we have a big customer in South Africa who operates in about a dozen countries in the Southern African region. And when we first started working with them, they were like, well, we get hundreds of thousands of emails every week. It's like, actually 2/3 of those emails are just copies of copies. And they didn't believe us at first. We actually had to kind of prove it to them. They're like, we're not, as soon as we'd gone live, because Sedna gets rid of the copies, we went live. They're like, we're not getting, where are our emails? We're missing emails. And that basic duplication. And funny enough, when in our business, when in maritime people CC or BCC or use a distribution list, I think there's a story we tell ourselves that used to be telex and there was one address and that type of thing. I don't think it's anything to do with that. I think what happens is that the risk of something being missed is very high. And so people CC their boss, they CC someone who could help, they CC the risk department, that type of thing. And then all those people have to process it. And if they have to process copies of copies, then it's just exponentially more work. So for us, that's a big part of our efficiency. We ensure there's only one version of the email that everybody can work on. Where possible, we try to connect it to an expert system like yours that could tell us what movement it's about. And then ideally, with our newer generation of software, you can pull that data out and push it back into your internal workflows. But no, it's definitely a surprise when the customer discovers that. Yeah.
What do you see if you look at the Setna history? What is your biggest accomplishment, or what was the biggest compliment that you got from a customer? Like this, Bill, this is where.
I mean, not all change is easy, right? I think this is one of the things, and it's very difficult to have feature parity maybe with an Outlook, right? Because you're doing very different things. But probably the thing I'm most proud of is that we're much better now at change management, preparing the company and the user for change. But the initial shock of the system almost always dissipates in days or weeks to, I could not go back. I could not go back to a way of working where I had to figure out if this was the email I had to work on. I could not go back to a way of working where I couldn't collaborate with my colleague on it, and I would not go back to a way of working where I wasn't connected to Teqplay or another voyage management system or operational system. So I mean, as a builder of software, that's really gratifying. And I will say, I mean, the truth is I agreed to try to solve this problem for both Transmarine, our earliest customer, and then later on Glencore Oil, because I was trying to sell them something else, right? But I couldn't get them to pay attention to that other thing because they're like, yeah, but we just have too many email. And what is exciting is that we genuinely, Sedna is an act of empathy. Whether we like it or not, people have to work in email. And the idea that we can give them way less time in email, and we hear it time and again, is for a builder of software really, really cool. And to use that, the company Grindrod in South Africa, who I was talking about, Tracy, who runs the business there, she said, I think everybody here goes home about a half hour early every day because of Sedna. And that's like real world impact. Yeah.
And looking ahead on your journey. You said like email is not, we are in the email business, but it is not what we really like or what we want to get rid of it. How does that future look like?
I think take a very big picture and then boil it down to something more practical. What we do think is that, much like the internet itself, email is a core protocol. And that core protocol has had very little genuine innovation in the last 30 years, 20 or 30 years. Unlike the internet itself, which had Netscape and web servers and all of this kind of technology explosion on top of it, email has just essentially run the same way. And you've had one hegemonic provider, the GroupWise, Lotus, Outlook, Gmail after another, without really huge increases in innovation. So what we see as the potential opportunity is that you have this huge global network that everybody's already on. And if you can layer on more intelligence, which AI is driving in a very genuine way now, not just kind of a buzzwordy way, over a network that is ubiquitous, universal, and free to access effectively, I think you can build much more intelligent workflows on top of that. And so for us, we see it in the latest version of our system. It's just coming out this month, in fact, something we call Sedna Canvas, which allows software companies like yourself to build rich interactions which are not email dependent inside of Sedna. So we can give you access to the 5 oil majors and their workflows, and we can give another technology company that solves a very bespoke problem access to the leading food companies, those types of things. So our vision is very much a platform that can distribute innovation to the maritime market in a way that has really impaired digitization. Because as you know, in our industry, the problem is distribution. How do you get your product in front of the guy or the woman who's going to use it? And so I really see Sedna as a path to that, because email is already a very ubiquitous platform. That was a very long answer. But, email as a platform, I think, is a way to think about it.
I like this way of thinking about email as a protocol. Yeah. And again, I think the same use whatever there is and build on top of it.
That's right.
And then, of course, eventually you can reinvent or redefine the email as it was.
Yeah. So, It's very alluring to want to build something new, right? And but it's a bit like all the different chat apps we have, and all the different we ICQ and MSN, and now we have Signal and Telegram and that type of thing. So it's just kind of getting more and more efficient with what you have.
Email is really about collaboration and communication. So I think that is the essence that we are kind of tackling over there.
Very much so.
And then you mentioned AI. I love that discussion. I really do see the power of AI. And I also see, like, let's take the example. You say, like, people were sending a lot of emails because there were significant risks involved.
Yep.
If we take that side, and then we take on the other side, like avoiding all risks at all. AI is introducing quite some risks because of, it's saying things which are not true, and it's making up. How do you see this balance? Because that is for me, like, okay, I get a safety part.
Yeah.
This is key. This is foundational, fundamental. So it will be really hard to transition. And this AI part is actually, Do we have sufficient proof that the industry can move towards that?
I think so. We're kind of, where are we in the AI hype cycle? That's kind of the question. Luckily for all of us, I think vendors, it's happening quite quickly, right? The ChatGPT comes out, LLMs become mainstream. People try a lot of things on it, and it's really cool. What is the main use case that we're seeing in a lot of companies? How's my spelling? How's my grammar, right? The risks, you're right, of pushing a bunch of customer proprietary data to these models and asking it to summarize, the risk that it might miss something is very high. And then you layer on the hallucination risk and these other things. Now, I think these are software opportunities for vendors like us, right? We can build maritime specific models that can eliminate hallucination. All the ships in the world, all the ports in the world, hey, don't make stuff up, only pull from this data source. So I think this is a opportunity for us to sell a safer model, safer data set to the marketplace. But the real question remains, what do we ask these things to do? Right? And in asking them to do these things, what impact will it have on the profitability and safety of our customers? And to a very large extent, I think some of it, the jury's out, right? And I'm quite optimistic about it because I think conversation and data intensive industries like ours are well suited to large language models, but the industry is going to have to do an awful lot of experimentation to determine what question they should ask. And we have our own views of it, like where is there data mismatches? Where is there risk occurring that normally in this pattern doesn't occur? Where is there something which I haven't read? Where is the sentiment suddenly negative? These are all, I think, very useful cases for AI. That's one part of it. The other part of it is really there's still very much a movement in our industry to create workflow-based software that's quite text box driven and fill in this, fill in that, and that type of thing. I think fill out all the bill of lading fields and these types of things. I think there's or the noon report, force the master to do all these different standards. I think AI very quickly, and we're already running experiments, is going to be able to pull that, really get 99.9% accurate that this is the fuel number for the ship, in metric, and drop it into an expert system to act on it. So that's where we're concentrating our efforts, safer models that have maritime domain knowledge, and then extracting data that's true for processing, so to speak. Yeah.
Cool, Bill. Yeah. I want to go on, but I think we should wrap up.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
I really, really appreciated having you over here and having this conversation.
Yeah, real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thanks.